The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October 1967. Jimi Hendrix was sitting in his manager's office in London, watching the rain streak down the windows of the narrow building in Soho. Chas Chandler hung up the receiver and turned to him with an expression that mixed excitement and concern. "That was Ed Sullivan's people," Chandler said. "They want you on the show." Jimmy looked up from the magazine he'd been flipping through, The Ed Sullivan Show. In 1967, that was still the golden ticket. The platform that had introduced America to Elvis, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. One appearance could change everything, could turn a British phenomenon into an American superstar overnight. "When?" Jimmy asked quietly. "3 weeks, but there are conditions." There were always conditions with television. Jimmy had learned that much in his brief time in the spotlight. The BBC had conditions. European TV had conditions. Everyone wanted the excitement of new music, but they wanted it sanitized, packaged, made safe for their audiences. "What kind of conditions?" Chandler pulled out a piece of paper from his desk. The list was typed in neat, professional font, the kind of document that someone had spent time crafting, making sure every demand was clear and non-negotiable. "Hair," Chandler read aloud. "They want it cut, significantly shorter, more conservative styling." Jimmy touched his afro unconsciously. It wasn't just hair to him. It was identity, heritage, a statement about who he was and where he came from. In London, it made him exotic, interesting. In America, it would make him threatening. Clothing, no bright colors, no patterns, no jewelry, standard television appropriate attire, dark suit, white shirt, conservative tie. The list continued. Song selection had to be approved in advance. Lyrics would be reviewed for content. Any guitar techniques deemed too provocative would need to be toned down. No feedback, no playing behind the head, no playing with teeth. Performance duration strictly limited to 2.5 minutes. "They want me to be someone else," Jimmy said after Chandler finished reading. "They want you to be palatable," Chandler replied, "to 20 million Americans watching on Sunday night." Jimmy stood and walked to the window. Outside, London continued its gray October routine. People hurried past with umbrellas, heads down against the rain. He thought about America, the country he'd left less than a year ago. The country where he'd struggled for years to be taken seriously as a musician, where his race and his style and his approach to music had kept him playing backup for other people's dreams. "What do you think?" Jimmy asked. Chandler was quiet for a long moment. As Jimmy's manager, he knew the business implications. Ed Sullivan could launch Jimmy into a different stratosphere of fame and success. The Beatles had credited their Sullivan appearance with breaking them in America. It was a formula that worked. "It's your choice," Chandler said finally, "but I'll tell you what they told me off the record. They think you're too wild, too sexual, too dangerous for their audience. They're offering you the show despite their reservations, not because they believe in what you're doing. They want the name Jimi Hendrix without Jimi Hendrix." "Something like that." Jimmy turned from the window. His expression was calm, thoughtful. There was no anger in it, no frustration, just consideration. "Set up a meeting," he said. 3 days later, Jimmy and Chandler flew to New York. The Ed Sullivan Theater sat like a monument to American entertainment on Broadway, its marquee promising the next Sunday's guests to passing tourists and commuters. Inside, the building hummed with the controlled energy of television production. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in a conference room on the 4th floor. Ed Sullivan himself wouldn't be there, but his key producers would, the people who made the decisions about who appeared and how. Jimmy arrived on time, wearing a relatively conservative outfit by his standards. Dark pants, a simple shirt, minimal jewelry. Not the full transformation they'd requested, but a gesture toward compromise. He sat quietly in the conference room, looking out the window at the theater district while they waited. The producers filed in at exactly 2 p.m. 3 men in dark suits, all in their 40s or 50s, all carrying folders and wearing expressions of professional courtesy mixed with skepticism. They looked like men who'd been in television long enough to know exactly what worked and what didn't. "Mr. Hendrix," the lead producer said, extending his hand. "Bob Precht. Thank you for coming." They settled around the conference table. The leather chairs creaked softly as everyone found their positions. Prest opened his folder with deliberate precision and pulled out photographs. Publicity shots of previous musical guests. Conservative, clean-cut performers who looked like they could have stepped out of a corporate brochure. The photos were spread across the polished table like playing cards. Pat Boone smiling wholesome. The Lettermen in matching suits. Bobby Vinton looking safe and unthreatening. Each image carefully curated to represent what American television considered acceptable. "This is the image we cultivate on The Sullivan Show," Precht explained, his fingers trailing across the photographs. "Wholesome, family-friendly, accessible to all demographics. Our audience spans from children to grandparents, and we have a responsibility to maintain certain standards." The air conditioning hummed quietly overhead. Outside the conference room windows, the sounds of Broadway traffic created a constant urban murmur. Jimmy's eyes moved slowly across the photographs, studying each face, each pose, each carefully constructed presentation of sanitized rebellion. He nodded politely, saying nothing. But something had shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening of his shoulders, a quiet recognition of exactly what he was being asked to become. "Now, we've heard your music. We know you're talented, very talented. But talent alone isn't enough for television. Presentation matters. Image matters. The way you come across to viewers in their living rooms." One of the other producers, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "We're prepared to offer you a spot on the show, but we need assurances that you'll work with us on your presentation." They went through the list again. Hair, clothing, song selection, performance style. Each demand delivered politely but firmly as non-negotiable requirements for appearing on America's most important variety show. "The guitar work," Precht continued, "needs to be toned down. We understand you have a very energetic performance style. That works fine for concerts, but television is more intimate, more restrained. Our audience isn't prepared for the kind of showmanship they might see at a nightclub." Jimmy listened to each requirement without interruption. His hands rested calmly on the table. His expression remained neutral, attentive. He asked no questions, raised no objections, showed no signs of anger or frustration. "Do you understand what we're asking?" Precht asked after finishing the list. "I understand," Jimmy said quietly. "And are you willing to work with us on these points?" There was a pause, not dramatic, not theatrical. Just a moment of consideration, like someone deciding what to order for lunch. "No," Jimmy said. The word hung in the air like smoke. Simple, quiet, final. Precht blinked. "I'm sorry. I can't do what you're asking," Jimmy said, his voice remaining calm and respectful. "I appreciate the opportunity, but I can't be someone else." "Mr. Hendrix," the thin producer said, "perhaps you don't understand the magnitude of what we're offering. This is the Ed Sullivan Show. We made the Beatles household names in America. We can do the same for you." "I understand that," Jimmy replied, "and I'm grateful. But what you're asking me to change, that's who I am. My hair, my clothes, the way I play. That's not style. That's not presentation. That's me." The room fell silent. These were men accustomed to negotiation, to compromise, to finding middle ground that satisfied everyone involved. Artists wanted exposure. Television wanted content that fit their format. There was always a way to make it work. But Jimmy wasn't negotiating. He wasn't asking for different terms or proposing alternatives. He was simply saying no. "Let me be clear," Precht said, his professional courtesy showing the first signs of strain. "If you appear on our show looking and performing the way you do now, it would be problematic. Our sponsors have expectations. Our audience has expectations." "I understand that too," Jimmy said. "Then surely you can see the wisdom of making some adjustments. Small compromises that would allow you to reach millions of people." Jimmy was quiet for a moment, looking down at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. "The people who need to hear my music will find it. I don't need to pretend to be someone else to reach them." The third producer, who hadn't spoken until now, leaned back in his chair with the expression of disbelief. "You're turning down the Ed Sullivan Show," he said. "Do you understand what that means? Do you understand how many artists would kill for this opportunity?" I'm not turning down the opportunity, Jimmy said. I'm turning down the conditions. Precht closed his folder with a sharp snap. His patience had reached its limit. Mr. Hendrix, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your music is good. We wouldn't have called if it wasn't. But America isn't ready for what you represent. The way you look, the way you move, the sounds you make. We're trying to help you bridge that gap, to find a way to present you that audiences can accept. I know you think you're helping, Jimmy said, but what you're really asking is for me to apologize for who I am before I even introduce myself. The words hit differently than anything Jimmy had said before. Not confrontational, but clear. Not angry, but honest. The producers shifted uncomfortably. That's not what we're asking, Precht said, but his voice lacked conviction. What would you tell Elvis? Jimmy asked suddenly. When he came to you with those hips, that voice, that energy, did you ask him to tone it down? That was different. How? Precht didn't answer immediately. The room felt smaller now, charged with an uncomfortable tension. Elvis was, Precht started, then stopped. White, Jimmy finished quietly. Elvis was white. No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, the sounds of Broadway traffic filtered through the windows. Somewhere in the building, a rehearsal was happening, instruments and voices mixing together in preparation for Sunday night. This isn't about race, the thin producer said finally. Maybe not, Jimmy replied, but it's not about race either. Chandler, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Gentlemen, I think we've reached an understanding. Thank you for your time. They stood to leave. Handshakes were brief, professional, empty of warmth. As they reached the door, Precht called after them. Mr. Hendrix, you're making a mistake. We're offering you everything you could want. Fame, money, legitimacy in America. All we're asking for in return is some flexibility. Jimmy turned back to face him. What I want is to play my music for people who want to hear it, not to perform someone else's idea of who I should be. And if that means staying unknown, if that means never reaching the mainstream American audience? Jimmy smiled for the first time since the meeting began. It was a gentle, sad smile. Then I guess I'll stay unknown. They left the Ed Sullivan Theater and walked out into the afternoon chaos of Broadway. Chandler was quiet until they reached the street. You know what you just did? He asked. I said no. You said no to everything we've been working toward. The American breakthrough, the mass market success. Jimmy stopped walking and looked at his manager. Chaz, if I have to stop being myself to become successful, then success isn't worth having. That's very noble. It's also very expensive. They stood on the sidewalk as people flowed around them. New York in all its energy and ambition and hunger for something new. There will be other opportunities, Jimmy said. Will there? It was a fair question. In 1967, television was the gateway to American success. Radio mattered, touring mattered, but television was how you reached the masses, how you became a household name. But Jimmy was betting on something different. He was betting that authentic expression would find its audience without compromise, that people hungry for real music, real emotion, real truth would seek it out regardless of whether it appeared on Sunday night variety shows. 6 months later, Jimmy proved himself right. The Monterey Pop Festival happened in June 1967. No conditions, no requirements, no demands for image modification. Just music, raw and honest and overwhelming. Jimmy's performance became legendary overnight. Not through television, but through word of mouth, through rock journalism, through the underground networks of people who understood that they'd witnessed something unprecedented. America met Jimi Hendrix not through Ed Sullivan's sanitized presentation, but through his own terms. The impact was explosive, authentic, lasting. By 1968, Jimmy was selling out arenas across America. His albums were topping charts. His influence on music was undeniable and growing. Bob Precht watched this success with a mixture of admiration and regret. In a 1975 interview with Variety magazine, 7 years after Jimmy's death, he reflected on that meeting. We thought we were protecting our audience, Precht said. We thought we were helping him by making him more acceptable. But what we were really doing was trying to diminish what made him special. Do you regret not finding a way to make it work? The interviewer asked. I regret not understanding that America was ready for Jimi Hendrix exactly as he was. We underestimated our audience. We underestimated him, and we missed the chance to be part of something historic. Would you do anything differently if you could go back? Precht was quiet for a long moment. I'd ask him to teach us something instead of asking him to learn our limitations. The story of that meeting became part of rock folklore. Not the dramatic confrontation some people imagined, but a quiet moment when an artist chose authenticity over opportunity, integrity over compromise. Jimmy never spoke publicly about the Sullivan Show rejection. When asked in interviews about television appearances, he'd simply say that some platforms weren't right for his music. He never criticized the show or its producers, never made it about them, because it wasn't about them. It was about him and his understanding that real success couldn't be built on pretending to be someone else. The Ed Sullivan Show continued for 3 more years after that meeting. It featured dozens of musical acts, many of whom went on to successful careers. But none of them changed music the way Jimi Hendrix did. None of them had the courage to say no to everything in order to remain themselves. In the end, Jimmy's quiet refusal taught America something important: that authenticity couldn't be packaged, sanitized, or made safe for mass consumption. That the most powerful artists were the ones who refused to apologize for who they were, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what everyone else thinks you want.